It wasn't coming from outside. I tracked the sound to the kitchen, and there it was, the old wall clock, the one I had never bothered to wind, its pendulum swinging with authority. The clock had been dead since I arrived. Tom had made a joke about Entropy's victory in the provinces. Now it was alive, taking charge of the kitchen. I've glanced at the calendar. The day was marked with a green asterisk, the green colour meaning a cosmic event in the other category, so not lunar nor solar. The note said below the date, time distortions. I haven't reached the part in the routine's notes where this was mentioned, so I had to go into this event blind. The curtains next to the clock started to fade in colour, and the floral pattern began to melt, stems running like watercolour drops down the crude textile, ink bleeding into cream, the old fable of home undressing itself in slow motion. I expected a draft, a window snapped ajar by the pressure front, but nothing moved except the shadows, extending themselves by degrees until the table and chairs stretched and warped, as if preparing to unpin their legs from the linoleum and drift upward into the dusk. The green asterisk on the calendar throbbed behind my eyes, and now the clock's hands twitched, every tick a small seizure. I waited for the crescendo, but time seemed uncertain how to escalate. In lieu of wind, a pressure built in my inner ear, the sort that presages storms, or the and all the full flesh of sadness and pains of pain have been turned in death. Electrical, the air punching tiny fists along my scalp. The radio on the counter, never more than muffled static, snapped to clarity in a hot surge. A man's voice reading poetry, something about a god running backwards through rivers of milk. The words were not so much recited as squeezed raw from a struggling, submerged throat. Another voice, tinny and abrasive, cut in to correct pronunciation. Then both voices tangled and pulled each other apart, syllables fracturing, reconstructing in different registers. The kitchen clock kept up its mechanical tantrum, a dictator even over the radio chaos. I could feel seconds collecting in the folds of the curtains, in the bowing surfaces of the table, and in my own molars. I pressed my tongue to my teeth, and the pressure ratcheted higher and sharper until I was sure a power line must have fallen and was writhing across the roof. At the 37-minute mark, the clock's hands now both quivering at right angles, everything stopped. The radio spat silence, and the pendulum locked in mid-swing. My breath was the only movement, and even that seemed contested, my lungs caught in the act of inflating, uncertain if the air here was still legal tender. I worked at breathing until breath returned, tremulous and provisional. There's a quality to these moments, one I've learned to respect, the way the physical world clears its throat and looks away, discreetly allowing other protocols to supersede. Sometimes, if I'm honest, I respect it less and simply endure it, because this is the cost, isn't it, of knowing the rules well enough to live here. I inspected the kitchen. The clock was still, hands at right angles like a semaphore. I tapped the radio, but it only offered a faint whine, like the memory of a signal. I opened the window, and the forest no longer bristled with artifacts, just raw dusk, rising in gradations, indifferent and complete. For a minute I let the cold air in, as if that could sweep away the residue of whatever had just moved through me. I documented everything when a bright flash blinded me for a moment, and there he was, in all his 30s glory, my beautiful late husband, John. My mouth started to quiver, eyes started to water up.
And lastly, I love you, and always will love you, and I'm patiently waiting for you on the other side, so don't fear your own passing. I'll be there for you as I always was.
The last few words were a mere whisper as he completely faded away. Suddenly, the suffocating silence was broken by a single, slow cook of the mystical clock, and then another one, and another one which came faster and louder than its predecessor. Soon I could feel a rhythm building again. Whatever power had been pinning the world in place unspooled all at once, and I let myself collapse against the battered counter, hands splayed on the formica cornice. I didn't write things down immediately. There's a violence in recording hauntings too soon, as if you declare them facts and forfeit whatever grace they hold. Instead, I poured coffee and watched the steam work through its own brief afterlife in the cold kitchen air. When the trembling subsided, I fetched the old ledger from the sideboard and opened it to a blank page. The cover was warped from generations of storms, from hands far more practical than mine. Each new entry formed a sort of nervous system stitched through the property's history. I inked the 3 quests in lucid block letters, trying not to let my penmanship betray the shaking in my bones. Locket. Crying woman. Prepare the forest. It seemed that the restarted cock's rhythm belonged to the forest now, or it always mimicked its heartbeat. I just couldn't understand what it meant. Each tick corresponded to a gentle narrowing of the window light, as if the whole house were passing through a tunnel of fur, the world outside compressing to a pinhole. I braced for the chest-clutching panic that should have come, but it didn't. Instead, a strange clarity. My list of errands: locket, prying woman, prepare the woods. It sounded at first like the punchline to an unwritten joke, a riddle delivered by a god moonlighting as a crossword editor. But John's hug had rewired something. The grief static was still there, but the channels were wide open, the signal sharp. I felt ready, but wasn't sure for what. I closed the notebook and reread my own event log, backwards, until I found the last mention of the locket. Considered key, but unverified. Current location, suspected to have been taken by the forest keeper's lair. This simple fact strangely surprised me a lot. It made sense, but in a way it was a strange concept. I always imagined lovely Steve to just become one with the forest after he had done his horrifying visits to the cabin. I found a sticky note that fell out of the notebook in another handwriting. Tongs, probably. The book Goblin. The boot goblin Prime Minister was worried that 5 Cs had been bitten. I was hoping never to test that particular line item in the incident catalogue, but it was only a matter of time. He was one of the original property pests, a folkloric micro-terror immortalized in the margin art of Grandad's ledgers. Tiny faces, scowling, always perched on mud-caked boots. His origin, like all the best cabin vermin, was a collision of bad luck and incautious ritual. There were rules to avoid him, though. Always leave offerings on rock, never on wood. Don't wear animal prints inside. If you trip on the threshold after midnight, abandon your footwear till sunrise. The rituals were half farce, half practical joke. I checked the clock again. 45 minutes gone, and the green asterisk glowed with radioactive urgency in my peripheral vision. I knew then I had to go. Steve was waiting for my offering. Time did not stop for him. I laced my boots and triple knotted them. There was another rule checked off the list. I prepared my day pack with the list of strange items and some food and water, and off I went on my first real adventure into the deep, lush forest. The woods looked different in the aftermath, the air clear and charged like the world after a solar flare. Everything smelt of drying hay and the inside of a piano. I paced down the main footpath, counting the steps between landmarks in a voice I barely recognized as my own. The dirt was patterned with recent tracks, rabbits maybe, or something smaller, but a few boot prints ran parallel to my line. too crisp in the mid-melt mud to belong to anyone but me. Except I hadn't been this way since last week, and those treads were wrong. A tight herringbone, not the big box tread of my gear, and small, almost dainty. I knelt over them. The cabin had a taste for the theatrical. I ignored the urge to call out and moved on. Tom's boot goblin was meant to be metaphorical, a joke about habits that outlive their context. But I'd seen worse things in the woods than folklore, and lately suspected it was more like a coda, a leftover nerve at the edge of sensation. Whatever haunted the old footpaths was persistent, and it liked to be seen, or at least suspected. I made a game of calling roll, logging each anomaly in my little reporter's notebook. A half-digested candy wrapper in the undergrowth, suspiciously bright fungus sprouting on the north side of a cedar, and the hardware store keyring hanging on a dead coyote. Each detail suggested a minor breach in protocol, a hairline crack in the scenario. I followed the herringbone pattern, squinting at every intersection, and kept the locket mission in the front chamber of my brain. I wouldn't underestimate Steve. Placing his offering was one thing, finding and entering his lair was entirely another. I wasn't exactly afraid of him, but the other creatures that lived here did terrify me still. And since I was completely alone on my quest, I had to fight the urge to run back the path I came from. The forest narrowed at the gulch, where the property's topography was easiest to defend. I paused at the marked boundary, double-checked my pack, and listened. A sapling clicked in the wind. Nothing human. Finally, the path started the long-awaited elevation marked on the map, and thus started my hour-and-a-half-long ascent to the mountaintop. I was exhausted 50 minutes into the climb and was looking for a place to stop and rest, but tripped over a large rock and faceplant into a large stone. When I came to, an unsightly, hunched, green-grey creature was trying to bite into my foot, desperately trying to gnaw off the boot to get to my flesh. I quickly kicked him into the bush. This greatly enraged him, but I didn't wait around to find out how much. I grabbed my backpack, pulling it onto my chest, and started running while panicking and rummaging through the pack to find the boot stuffed with meat cubes. He almost reached me when my hand found it. I felt a tug on my left foot, and I face-planted into the soft grass this time, and turned around to face my attacker, who was much more vehemently trying to tear off my leg with the boot still attached to it. Diana.
Oh! So you are finally here. You are a couple of centuries late, Missy. I don't know if you'll still succeed now.
He hissed at me angrily as he climbed off me.
Anyways, next time, the meat will be enough. No boot required. Just leave the meat in the boot on the stone where you fainted. And please, don't smear your filthy pure blood onto me stone. Thanks.
And with that elongated thanks, he disappeared into the forest as quickly as he came. After a suitably mortifying interval, spent brushing myself off and checking with morbid curiosity for open wounds, none, but my ego would need triage, I limped up the path, flinching at the scrape of my own gaiters. My foot throbbed, either from the boot goblin's grip or the sensation of fraternizing with a local legend. I couldn't tell. The forest pinwheeled with the kind of light you see after blood loss. It etched every branch and hummock into stark mythography. I lay there, grass blades pressed into my cheeks, replaying every syllable. Guardian. He'd said it with a venomous deference, as if the word should gag me. The tremor in my hands refused to leave. I made a mental note to boil every surface of my body when I returned. My knees wobbled, and the locket quest loomed steeper than ever. It was at this point that my mind, not to be outdone by reality, began to inventory worst-case scenarios like a bored insurance underwriter. I've managed to sit up and assess my body. Bruised knees, a painful left ankle, and some sort of second head growing on my forehead. I got out the first aid kit from the pack, pulled up my pant legs, and finally pulled off the now incredibly tight left boot. Several bruises, colours of the rainbow, fantastic. I've poured some antiseptic onto my knees and put some bandages on, and tried to the best of my abilities to stabilise my ankle, and gently stuffed all of it back into my boot, and redid the triple knot that pretty much saved me from becoming a pen. Paraplegic or worse. Suddenly there was noise from the bush next to me. The goblin stuck his head out.
Here, don't eat it yet. Only eat it when you're home safe and secure, and leave all the lights on in the house, including the porch light. This is very important, Diana.
He put down by me a large green-blue mushroom that glowed a little.
Also, it's a mild hallucinogenic, so you might want to just take it right before bed.
I sat there, shaken up, as a terrible thought sank in. He knew exactly who I was before he attacked. Why? My stomach lurched. Was I playing checkers while everyone else was playing three-dimensional chess? I'd been so certain about staying, about finding structure here. But now, God, what if Tom had deliberately kept things from me? And centaurs. Seriously. Goblins I could rationalize. Folklore exists for a reason. But this was becoming absurd. What's next? The Yeti will be my neighbor and bring over pecan pie as a welcoming present. Yet I couldn't deny the mushroom in my bag, couldn't unfell those teeth on my boot, and the deep guttural shaking I had in my core from Steve's gaze. Part of me wanted to sprint back to the cabin, pack my things, and never look back. Another part whispered that if I left, I'd never understand. If Steve was right, if I really am this soul, meant to restore balance, shouldn't there be signs? The notes suggested others had different experiences, but how different? Was I special, or just especially vulnerable? Sunday marks 2 weeks here, and I still can't decide if I'm the chosen one, or the chosen prey. I've spent a good 10 minutes recording all of this in a small notebook I've brought. I've collected the strange mushroom gently in a little plastic sample bag I've found in the no perishables compartment. I've searched a little bit more and found a permanent marker too, so I've written the name on the bag. This is fantastic, I thought. Tom really thought about everything when putting the pack together. I've put everything back where it lived before and turned over to the tabletop position and pushed myself up while being grateful for doing yoga in my early 20s. Finally, I've managed to swing the pack onto my back, and I've started limping back towards the main path. Every step was painful, my head throbbed. Fortunately, nothing deadly, but it did slow me down significantly in the climb. The next hour of ascent was punctuated the fact. The undergrass pat, the stars of seeds, sometimes just a shifting in the underbrush, or the sliver of a tail disappearing at the edge of vision. I clung to the path's switchbacks with the desperation of a dispute clerk on deadline. The higher I climbed, the more the light thinned, and the woods pressed in, not so much darkening as folding in on themselves, a recursive origami of branches and vines partially blocking out the sunlight. I've glanced at my watch. At 11:30, I was well in time, still to reach the summit, where the stone circle lay. I was, however, unsure if I was able to venture much further, as I was horribly out of shape and freshly injured. I decided to reevaluate again when the offer was made. I've prepared a special offering this time for Steve. I had scored the kitchen cabinets for half an hour, weighing the merits of various pantry items, before deciding on the tin of anchovy stuffed olives and a mini bottle of the fancy bitters Tom reserved for solstice cocktails. I felt a little shame putting them together, but also a certain hopeful amusement. Maybe Steve, like any seasoned predator, would appreciate a change in the usual parade of deli meat. At the summit, the stone circle conducted a wind that spiraled up from below, sharp enough to sting. There was a faint ring of trampled grass from recent activity. One of Tom's shoes, I noted, seemed to have already made a double pass around the perimeter. It comforted me, in a way, to see evidence that these rituals were practiced with a certain regularity, like brushing one's teeth or taking out the compost. The summit itself was a disappointment. A humdrum bold in the land, ringed by birches and juvenile shock, their papery skin curling from the wind and the ceaseless moonlight. Steve's lair was rumoured to be nearby, though nobody had ever formally confirmed this. The family chronicles devolved into speculation by generation 2, then conjecture from rumours overheard in town. My marching orders were simple, though. Make the offering on the altar stone, just as the founders had, and do not look back until you're off the perimeter. I approached the altar with the self-consciousness of a first confession. The stone was flecked with late lichen, not nearly as dramatic as in the dusk photos Tom had left in the records. I cleared a patch of old snow from the main altar stone with my sleeve and placed the offering on the stone. A double-wrapped sandwich, 2 sample vials, 1 blood, 1 hair, with instructions per notebook's volume. 3, a single nickel-plated Canadian coin, and a pinched tail of anchovy-stuffed olives in the centre, with the bitter bottle balanced, sacramental at the edge. I said the ritual words, or as much of them as I could remember, mixing Latin, high school French, and my mother's invocations to St. Jude. The wind didn't answer, but it did stutter when I said Steve, like a missed beat. I bowed my head and counted backwards from 50, eyes fixed on the blue veins of the stone. The cold began to chew through my jacket's seams. This was the crucial part, waiting just long enough that you didn't undercut the sincerity, but not so long that you seemed desperate. At the 30 count, I felt the temperature drop. It wasn't a graceful change, more like a descending elevator. 1 floor, 2, 3, and abruptly I was outside the reach of weather forecasts. The hairs on my forearms prickled. There was a sound, not a footstep or an animal, but a clever simulation of one, as if the woods were running a rehearsal for how things might die here. A dry, metallic click, then a wet chuckle.
Resourceful, as always,
Said a purring voice that belonged in a better century, or none at all. The down-to-earth attitude pulled a small chuckle out of me, but the warning beep went off on my Casio watch with 5 seconds left. I've bowed my head towards where I thought Steve was last, and slowly turned around and walked out of the circle, not looking back. I decided I had more than enough fun for today. I sat down on one of the stones in the outer circle to rest my leg and journal the new developments. As I carefully looked around, Steve was gone. An involuntary sigh of relief left me, as I looked around properly to see if I'm safe to journal here. But it was serene. No movement, no nasty goblin, just the gentle sounds of the wind. I let the notebook fall open across my lap, the pages stiff in the cold, and began to write, half by rote, half in the hope that the act of chronicling would route me to the spot. Observation. The entity responds to the protocol with enthusiasm, bordering on delight. Suggestion. Broaden the definition of appeasement. Note. Do not attempt humour in offering. Sense of irony unconfirmed and risk threshold unknown. Low tolerance towards the silence at the summit held for long, slow minutes. Once, the wind through the birch crowns wound itself into a voice, high and crackling, like plastic melting in a microwave. I forced myself to ignore it, to focus on the abrasion of pen against old paper. The impulse to look over one's shoulder becomes almost cosmic in these situations, like the invocation of a universal reflex. If the thing behind you is seen, it isn't truly real. But in the margin of vision, a flicker patrolled the far line of woods, and the sound of breathing, slow, deliberate, threaded every empty space. I finished the note, snapped the ledger shut, and propped my elbows to rest. Cold radiated up through the stone, nipping me back to a nervous clarity. I inventored the remains of my own offering. The olives had vanished, and the bitter bottle was emptied and upright. The coin was gone. I pressed my thumb to the smear where I'd bled for the hair vial, half expect a message to have been inscribed in blood. But no, only the dry grit of my own clumsiness. Steve, perhaps, believed in subtlety. Maybe the descent was, if not easier, at least less ceremonial. I took the slope slow, testing the weight I could bear on the bum ankle, making a game of leapfrogging from stable rock to muddy hummock and skipping every space in between. My foot thunked in the boot with a delicate numbed ache, and as the altitude sloughed away, so did the strange clarity from the mountain top, leaving only a slick, caffeinated twitchiness. By the time the cabin roof came into sight, dusk proper was closing in, and 1,000 cold needles jabbed at my cheeks. The clearing looked much the way I'd left it, orderly, patient, otherworldly, only in the studied absence of ordinary life. No cars, no distant chainsaws, not even the lonely twin-engine drone of float planes over the lake. It was narcotic, the stillness. My hand shook too much to work the latch on the porch. I kicked the door open with my good leg, shouldered through, and kept my boots on inside, despite the goblin warnings. The mushroom, now the size of a small gerbil from the warmth of the hike, and whatever ambient soracy clung to it, pulsed indigo under the porch light as I set it on the kitchen table. Every cell in my body vibrated with exhaustion, the compromised ankle, the radius of bruising across both knees, and the dull maraca hyphen shake in my skull. The only thing more dangerous than hiking hurt was the prospect of sleeping unprotected, so I limped through my lockdown routine. Windows checked, sensor batteries swapped, perimeter LEDs staked into the frosted ground. I even double-bolted the root cellar, an affectation I'd originally considered LARPing, but which now, after Steve, felt like a vital act of faith. Then I stripped in the entryway, dropping fleeces and gaiters and my own sweat-cabbered socks into the quarantine basket, and staggered to the bathroom to see what exactly I'd become. 2 mirrors had already been covered. Per Tom's field recommendations, objects of reflection may amplify agency in poltergeist cycles, but the medicine cabinet square was just exposed enough to give a slice of my face, pale and bloated, with a single Gothic velt rising from the brow, purpling by the minute. I looked like I'd lost a shovel fight. I laughed at myself in that soundless, desperate way you laugh on the way to an ER, and peeled away the rest of my day in ragged, inefficient motions. Iodine, Band-Aids, and an urgent swab of the interior nose, since it felt like I'd inhaled a kilo of cedar mulch. I considered the mushroom, then considered the warnings, and set it reverently on the ruined end table by the bed. "Find the locket," John had said, as if it was the first thing you reached for in a morning after a dreamless sleep. But Steve's lair was old history even in the family's folklore, and my notebook had nothing past the crude hand-drawn map, labelled with an X at Old Miner's Entrance. I was wondering if John's visage was actually real at all. I flipped the laptop open and plugged in the pen drive, found the search bar and typed one word, doubt. There were several entries, the first from Tom's grandfather, Harold's mother. Ursula. What name to give to someone? It read.
"There is no entity on this land save the one we bring in with us. I believe the keeper is a human impulse set loose in the wild, an echo, a need. If the woods answer back, it is only because we have trained them to respond." Please, if I am wrong, let my doubts be proof for the next one to read this. I have made every offering. None were accepted, none returned. Last night, I heard my mother's voice, clear as water, calling from the tree line that she never crossed alive. I went out to meet her, and the forest was empty, except for the shape it made when I wanted her most. In the morning I found the kitchen clock running backwards. Take that as you will.
The handwriting on the scan was wild, slanted, a desperate slash through the strict neatness of the earlier. She might have been onto something with this line of thinking, like her other sons, Rudolph's experiences. He had doubt too. Entry 14th of December, 2001.
Had the dream again. Lake frozen over, with dozens of tiny animal bodies embedded like shapes in an ice tray. Woke to find a rabbit carcass on the porch, splayed perfectly along the north-south boundary line. They tell me these are tests, the keeper's way of gauging devotion. But if a god needs constant flattery, is it really a god, or just a parasite? Do not trust the faces in the trees after 3. They are only there to keep you company, till you break. Then they take. Screams unheard by anyone. Skin shattered, body gone.
He even wrote a little nursery rhyme to remind himself to hush away the doubt. Below it, a postscript in Tom's handwriting. He lasted 8 years after this. The trees kept perfect count. He had shaken faith, and that shook me further. Entry, January 13th, 2009.
The entity is almost certainly not what we thought. It mimics, it anticipates. It might even try to fill a template we've supplied by decades of expectation. Once, in that winter blackout after Dad's accident, I saw it standing in the shed window, in my own clothes, hands folded over my chest. It kept him there for hours. When I went to confront it, the thing just smiled. I realized I'd left my gaiters in there. A small detail. But the entity expected me to come back. I stopped logging sightings after that. I've begun leaving messes behind on purpose to see if it reacts. It always does. If you read this, trust your first doubt more than your first hope.
The rest of the entries ran variations on the same. Test, record, doubt, repeat. Tom knows. He knows. But why the hell did he include his own entries into the logs, if he knew I would find them, and it would raise suspicion in me against him? I decided not to confront him for now. Also, another question surfaced. Is this the same entity masquerading as multiple interpretations, mirroring our own psyche? The third question is intent. Suddenly the phone rang. This is the end of part 4. Hopefully part 5 will be up in a couple of days. Subscribe and support my coffee addiction properly. Link in bio and description below.